The ballroom was glowing that night. Chandeliers hung high above the marble floor, spreading golden light across the room, making every polished surface shine. Music floated in the air. Soft violins and a gentle piano filled the space while laughter and clinking glasses created a rhythm of their own. It was the kind of night where people dressed in their best clothes. Jewels sparkled on necks and wrists. Perfumes mixed with the scent of fine wine and expensive food. Everyone in that room seemed to belong to a different world, a world of wealth and power, a world where status was everything. Waiters moved quietly between the tables, their black and white uniforms neat, their steps carefully measured so no one would notice their tired feet. Among them was Elena, a young woman with kind eyes and a graceful way of moving. She carried trays of glasses and plates as if it were an art. She did not stumble, she did not rush. Instead, she seemed almost like a dancer gliding between the crowd, though no one paid her much attention. To most of the guests she was invisible, just another face. In the background, Elena had been working at this grand hotel for a year. Every night she stepped into this ballroom she felt like she was stepping into a dream. Not because she wanted to be part of that rich world, but because she loved watching people, their laughter, their small dramas, the way they showed off their clothes and jewels. She often wondered what secrets these glamorous people hid behind their painted smiles. And while she worked, she kept her own secret, one that no one in that ballroom knew. Across the room, near the center table, sat Victor, a man impossible to ignore. His presence was loud even when he was silent. He was a millionaire known for his sharp suits, flashy watches, and a laugh that could be heard above the music. He enjoyed being the center of attention, and he enjoyed reminding others of their place. His friends gathered around him, nodding, laughing, drinking, and Victor, as always, played the role of the untouchable king. Victor had spotted Elena earlier. He noticed the way she moved, calm and steady, and for a moment he admired it. But admiration quickly turned into mischief. He was the kind of man who grew restless when the spotlight shifted away from him. Tonight, while everyone else admired the charity speeches and the music, he was looking for a way to stir the room. He wanted laughter, the cruel kind that made him feel powerful, the kind that made others smaller. As Elena walked past his table carrying a tray of champagne glasses, Victor leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. He whispered something to his friend, who chuckled, and then his eyes followed Elena again, her dark hair neatly tied, her step so smooth that not a single glass wobbled. She reminded him of a stage performer. But she was not a star here. She was just a waitress, and in his world, that meant she was beneath him, someone to joke about, someone who could not answer back. The night grew livelier, more people filled the dance floor, couples swayed to the music, their gowns swirling like colored waves. Applause rose as a pair of professional dancers performed a short routine. Their tango sharp and fiery. The audience clapped loudly, admiring the passion of the dance, and Victor, always eager to add his own voice, clapped the loudest, then leaned forward with a grin, an idea forming in his mind. He thought of the tango, the fiery dance of challenge and pride, and his eyes turned back to Elena, who had stopped near the corner to set down her tray. She seemed lost in thought for a brief second, her gaze following the dancers with quiet admiration, and Victor saw it, the spark in her eyes, and that was enough for him to make his move. The ballroom was alive with celebration, but underneath the golden light, a moment was about to form, a moment that would change everything. Elena was simply doing her job, pouring wine, clearing plates, but the universe seemed to have other plans for her. For in a room where she was meant to be invisible, she was about to become the center of the story, though she did not know it yet, and Victor, with his arrogance and restless need for attention, was about to light the fire. The night may have looked glamorous on the outside, but beneath the glitter and charm, something real was waiting to happen, something no amount of wealth or arrogance could control. Elena, the quiet waitress with a hidden past, and Victor, the millionaire who thought he could mock anyone without consequence, were about to meet on the same floor, not as servant and guest, but as challengers in a dance neither of them would ever forget. And so, while glasses sparkled and music played, while laughter filled the corners of the grand ballroom, the first act of this story unfolded quietly, hidden in glances and whispers, a storm preparing to break in the middle of a night that was supposed to be just another glamorous evening. Yet for Elena and Victor, it would be the night that changed everything. A night where pride and passion would collide on the polished floor beneath the golden light of the chandeliers. Victor leaned back in his chair, his gold watch glinting under the ballroom lights. The sound of music still filled the air. Couples were laughing and swirling across the polished floor. But Victor's mind was not on the dance. It was on Elena, the young waitress who had passed his table with such grace. She looked so calm, so steady, and something about her annoyed him, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she carried herself with a quiet confidence. The kind of confidence he thought only belonged to people like him, and that made him restless. He sipped his wine and leaned toward his friends, men and women dressed in the finest clothes, their faces flushed from too much drink, their laughter sharp and shallow. Victor whispered something in their ears and they laughed louder, their eyes turning to follow Elena as she walked away with her tray. She did not notice. She was busy working, making sure glasses were filled and plates were cleared, but to Victor she had become tonight's entertainment, someone to tease, someone to challenge, someone who could never fight back. The orchestra shifted to a stronger rhythm, the tango returned, fiery and bold, the kind of dance that demanded pride and power. Victor clapped along with the crowd, his grin widening, the idea in his head now fully formed. He stood up, drawing attention, his tall frame towering above his table, and with a voice that cut through the music, he called out to Elena. The room turned, curious, whispers fluttered across the tables. Who was he speaking to? Why was his tone filled with mockery? Elena froze for a moment, her tray balanced perfectly in her hands. She looked up and saw Victor's eyes fixed on her, his smirk daring her. She did not understand at first. Why was the millionaire speaking to her in front of everyone? But then his words rang out clearly, loud enough for the whole ballroom to hear. I'll marry you if you can dance this tango. The room erupted with laughter, glasses rattled on tables, some guests clapped, others covered their mouths in shock, but most laughed, for it was not meant as a real proposal. It was a cruel joke, a way to embarrass the waitress who had done nothing but her job. Victor's friends roared with laughter, slapping his back, cheering his boldness, and Victor soaked it in, proud of the attention, proud of the way he could turn a simple working girl into the center of a joke. Elena's face grew warm, her heart pounding in her chest. For a second she wanted to disappear, to vanish into the shadows where no one could see her. She felt every pair of eyes in the room pressing on her, judging her, mocking her. She tightened her grip on the tray to stop her hands from shaking. She lowered her eyes. But inside her chest something else stirred, something stronger than fear, a spark she had tried to keep hidden for years. The laughter rolled on, but not everyone was amused. A few guests frowned at Victor's cruelty. A few whispered to one another, wondering why such a powerful man needed to mock a young woman just to feel important. But no one spoke up, no one defended her. The ballroom was full of polite faces but silent mouths, and Elena stood alone in the spotlight of his challenge, the target of his arrogance. Victor grinned wider, expecting her to bow her head, to walk away quickly, to blush and hide. He was ready to raise his glass and laugh louder, to boast that even the bravest waitress would never dare to face him. But Elena did not move. She stood still, her mind racing, memories flooding back, memories of dance studios filled with mirrors and music, memories of her father clapping proudly when she mastered a difficult step, memories of competitions where she had worn a gown and taken the floor. Not as a servant, but as a dancer. She had buried that part of herself when life demanded sacrifice. But it had never left her. It lived in her bones, in the way she carried a tray, in the way she moved between tables. The orchestra continued to play, the dancers on the floor paused, sensing the tension. Guests leaned forward in their chairs, waiting to see what the waitress would do. Elena lifted her eyes slowly, meeting Victor's gaze, his smirk still painted across his face, his friends whispering, urging him on. She felt the sting of humiliation. But behind it was a fire that whispered, "You are not less than him, you are not less than anyone." Her lips parted, but no sound came at first. She breathed in deeply, steadying her nerves. And then, with a voice clear and calm, she answered, "If you wish to see me dance, then I will." The ballroom fell silent, the laughter died mid-breath, eyes widened, even Victor's smirk faltered for a second. No one had expected her to answer. No one had expected her to accept the challenge. The air was thick with shock. Some guests chuckled nervously, thinking perhaps she was joking. Others leaned closer, eager to see what would happen next. Elena did not blink. She did not step back. She had spoken, and her words carried the weight of someone who would not be mocked into silence. Victor laughed, though his laugh was not as strong as before. He waved to the orchestra, his pride forcing him to keep the joke alive. He called out, "Then let the music play, let the waitress show us a tango." His voice echoed across the hall. The musicians exchanged uncertain glances, but they obeyed, striking the first notes of the tango, sharp and bold, the sound slicing through the tension like a blade. Elena placed her tray down on the nearest table, her fingers trembling only for a second, then steady again. She walked forward slowly, every step graceful, every step defying the mockery. Whispers followed her. Gasps escaped lips, and Victor, still grinning, extended his hand dramatically, expecting her to stumble, to freeze, to prove him right. But Elena's eyes no longer showed fear, they showed something else. Something Victor did not recognize. Something that would soon turn the joke into his humiliation. And so, in the heart of the glamorous ballroom, under the golden chandeliers, the challenge had been spoken, the stage set. A millionaire's arrogance against a waitress's hidden strength. The crowd held its breath, waiting. The night that began with laughter was about to take a turn no one had expected. A turn that would be remembered long after the music ended. Elena stood in the middle of the ballroom, the golden lights reflecting on the polished floor, the echo of Victor's challenge still hanging in the air. The orchestra's first sharp notes of the tango were ready to begin. But for a moment time seemed to pause for her. She could hear the laughter of the guests fading into whispers. She could feel their eyes digging into her back, and in that heavy silence, her heart began to beat with memories she had tried for so long to bury. She was not just a waitress, though no one in that room knew it. Before her father's illness, before life forced her to take any job she could find, Elena had been a dancer, not just any dancer, but a competitor, a young woman who had spent years in mirrored studios perfecting every step, every turn, every movement of her body. She remembered the smell of polished wood floors, the sound of shoes tapping, the way music flowed through her veins like blood. Dancing had once been her entire world. Her freedom, her identity. As the guests whispered, her mind drifted back to when she was 16, standing in a crowded hall with her dance partner, her gown shimmering, her father sitting in the front row, clapping louder than anyone else. She could still hear his voice telling her, "You were born to dance, Elena, never forget that." Those words had lived in her heart, and even when everything changed, she had carried them quietly like a flame hidden from the wind. But then came the day her father fell ill, his strong hands shaking, his once bright smile tired, the hospital visits piling up like shadows. Elena had to make a choice. Dancing could not pay bills. Dancing could not buy medicine. Dancing could not keep food on the table. So she folded away her costumes. She hung her dance shoes in the back of the closet, and she put on the plain black uniform of a waitress, trading the applause of audiences for the quiet nods of strangers who never even looked her in the eye. She never told her co-workers at the hotel who she had been. She never mentioned her trophies tucked in a box under her bed. To them she was just Elena, the quiet girl who worked double shifts, who smiled politely, who carried trays with balance and ease. They sometimes joked about how she walked like she was gliding, how she never seemed clumsy. But they did not know the truth. They did not know that every step she took was built from years of discipline and rhythm. They did not know that inside her lived a dancer still breathing, still waiting. And now, in this moment, as Victor's mocking words circled her, as laughter tried to drown her, that hidden part of her stirred, like a bird pushing against the cage of her ribs. She remembered late nights when she practiced alone in her small apartment. No partner, no music, just the echo of her feet and the memory of stages she once owned. She remembered the weight of giving up her dream, the sting of watching others live the life she wanted, and she remembered the promise she had made to her father, that she would never let shame take away her gift, that no matter where life placed her, she would remain a dancer in her heart. Victor did not know this. He thought she was just a waitress, someone who would tremble and back away. He did not know the years of fire behind her calm eyes. He did not know the strength of someone who had lost everything but still carried dignity in her step. He thought his challenge was just a cruel joke. But for Elena it had become something more. It was a chance, a moment to show herself, to remind the world, and even herself, who she truly was. The crowd leaned closer, whispering, doubting. Some were excited to see her fail, others secretly hoped she would surprise them. But none of them knew her secret. None of them had seen her spin with perfect precision. None of them had seen the way she could turn music into a living thing. Elena lowered her eyes for a second, not from shame, but from concentration. She could almost hear her father's voice again. "Stand tall, Elena, never bow to anyone's laughter. Your dance will speak for you." Her hands, which had trembled when she set down the tray, were steady now, her breathing slowed, Her shoulders straightened, she looked up again, her gaze strong, not at the guests, not even at Victor, but at the space before her, the stage that was about to become hers, and in that moment, the ballroom transformed. The marble floor was no longer a servant's path. It was a dancer's floor. The chandeliers were no longer just light. They were the spotlight she once knew so well. She was no longer invisible. She was about to claim every eye, every ear, every breath in the room. Victor laughed again, trying to mask the flicker of doubt that had crossed his face. He expected her to step forward nervously, to fumble, but Elena's calm unnerved him. He could not see the flood of memories and strength rising inside her. He could not hear the invisible music that already moved through her bones. The crowd waited. The musicians held their instruments ready, the first bold notes of the tango rising like a spark in the silence. And Elena's past, her hidden truth, her years of discipline, were about to collide with the arrogance of a man who thought her unworthy. What no one knew yet was that this was not just a tango, not just a dance. This was Elena reclaiming herself. This was her answer to every smirk, every dismissive glance, every time life had tried to push her down. The challenge that Victor had meant as a joke had awakened the part of her that never truly died. The dancer was alive again, and soon, before the eyes of the wealthy crowd, before the man who mocked her, Elena would let her secret speak louder than any insult, louder than any laugh, louder than gold and power. She would let her dance tell her story. The ballroom shimmered, the crowd held its breath. Elena lifted her chin, her heart steady, her past burning inside her like fire, and with that fire she prepared to step forward, ready to turn a cruel challenge into the moment of her triumph. The music swelled, the violins sharp and dramatic, the piano keys striking bold notes. The ballroom felt suddenly heavier, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Elena stood at the edge of the polished dance floor, her uniform plain against the glitter of gowns and jewels, yet in that moment she seemed brighter than all of them. Every eye was fixed on her, some with pity, some with cruel amusement, and some with quiet curiosity. Victor leaned back in his chair with a smug grin, convinced the little waitress would falter, convinced she would shrink under the weight of his mockery. But Elena did not step back. She stepped forward, calm and deliberate, her shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. She no longer looked like a servant carrying trays. She looked like a woman about to take her place on a stage. The laughter in the room faded into a tense silence. Whispers replaced it. People leaned closer, some shaking their heads, thinking she was foolish to accept, others secretly excited to see what would happen. The orchestra waited, their bows and hands poised, waiting for the signal to begin, and all the while Victor's smirk grew wider, confident that his game would end in her humiliation. She stopped a few feet from him, her eyes steady, her chin slightly raised. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her silence was enough to challenge his arrogance. Victor chuckled, perhaps a little too loudly, and rose from his chair, adjusting his suit jacket, bowing with exaggerated flair. His friends clapped and whistled, egging him on. To them this was all entertainment, a scene to gossip about later. The mighty Victor playing with a waitress who dared to step out of her place. With a dramatic gesture he offered his hand, expecting her to take it timidly, but Elena's hand was steady as it slid into his, her touch firm, her gaze unbroken. For the first time Victor felt something unusual, a flicker of uncertainty. But he quickly buried it beneath his confident smile. He turned to the musicians, snapping his fingers, the signal to begin, and the orchestra obeyed. The first haunting notes of the tango filling the air like fire spreading across the room. The lights seemed to dim, the golden chandeliers casting a softer glow, and in that glow the dance floor transformed. It was no longer a place for wealthy guests to gossip and drink. It was a stage, a battlefield, and on it stood a millionaire who thought himself untouchable, and a young woman carrying years of unspoken strength. The tension was thick, so thick that even the guests who had laughed earlier now felt their hearts beat faster, waiting for the clash between pride and dignity. Victor took the first step, pulling Elena into the frame of the tango, his grip firm, his movements meant to impress. But Elena's body responded with precision, her posture perfect, her balance unshaken. She matched him without effort, her feet gliding in sync with the sharp rhythm of the music. She did not stumble, she did not falter. Her years of hidden training carried her, and in that instant, the crowd knew this was no ordinary waitress. This was a dancer, even if they did not yet understand how much of one. Whispers filled the corners of the ballroom, shocked voices asking who she was, how she moved like that. Some guests gasped softly, realizing the arrogance of Victor's challenge might cost him. And Victor himself, though still smiling, felt a small crack in his confidence. He tried to push harder, to lead her into complex steps, to test her balance. But each time Elena followed smoothly, her movements sharper, her gaze more focused. It was as if the music obeyed her, not him. For Elena, this was the turning point. No longer was she the invisible waitress mocked in front of strangers. She was becoming who she truly was. Every step reminded her of her father's applause. Every spin reminded her of the nights she danced until her body ached. Every graceful sweep of her arm reminded her that she was not powerless, not lesser. She was a dancer. And this was her stage, her moment, the moment life had given back to her, even if by accident. The crowd leaned forward, their laughter forgotten, their voices hushed. They were no longer watching a joke. They were watching a story unfold before them. A story they would never forget. Some even clapped softly to the beat, swept away by the fire of the tango. The power of the dance was no longer in Victor's hands. It was shifting. It was slipping away from the man who mocked, and into the woman who rose with courage. Victor tried to laugh again, tried to mask his unease, but Elena's eyes caught his, steady and fearless, her movements smoother than his, her presence stronger, and for the first time in years, he felt small. He had thought he was humiliating her, but instead she was exposing him, exposing his arrogance, his weakness, and soon, the whole room would see it. The orchestra played louder, the rhythm faster, and the turning point was complete. The crowd knew it, Victor knew it, and Elena knew it. This was no longer his challenge, no longer his game. The dance had become hers, and with each step she was rewriting the story, transforming from the mocked waitress into the star of the night. And there was nothing he or anyone else could do to stop it. The ballroom that had begun as his playground was now her stage. The cruel laughter had turned into awed silence, and the turning point had arrived. From this moment forward, Elena was no longer invisible. She was unforgettable. And Victor's mockery had become the spark that lit her triumph. The music burst louder. The strings sharp, the rhythm fierce. The tango was alive now, filling every corner of the ballroom. Elena's body moved with it as though the music was part of her soul. Her feet glided across the polished floor, quick and precise, her arms strong yet graceful. She was no longer the quiet waitress who carried trays. She was a dancer, commanding the room. Her eyes burned with focus, her every step carried confidence. And for the first time the crowd sat silent, their laughter gone, their attention fully captured by her. Victor tried to lead, his hand firm on her back, his steps bold. But something was wrong. He was used to being in control, used to people following his rhythm. Yet Elena was not following blindly, she was matching him, sometimes even guiding the flow without him realizing. Her body anticipated every beat before he did, her movements sharper, quicker, smoother. His arrogance began to slip. Each step revealed his weakness. Each turn showed that the so-called joke was turning into his own struggle. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Elena spun sharply, her skirt swirling, her foot landing with a perfect snap against the floor, the sound echoing louder than any clap. The orchestra seemed to rise with her, as if she were the true conductor. Victor stumbled slightly but quickly forced himself back into rhythm, his grin tightening. His friends who had cheered him on now sat with awkward smiles, unsure if they should still laugh or remain quiet, because it was becoming clear that this waitress was no ordinary woman. Elena's face remained calm, her movements controlled, but inside she felt alive in a way she had not for years. It was as if her body had been waiting for this, waiting for a stage, waiting for a chance to break free. The ballroom faded around her, the chandeliers, the jeweled gowns, the mocking eyes, they no longer mattered. All that mattered was the dance. And in that dance she poured every memory, every sacrifice, every hidden dream. She danced not just against Victor, she danced against every moment life had tried to push her down. She danced for herself, for her father, for the years she had lost. The crowd began to change, their whispers now filled with awe. People leaned forward, their eyes wide. Some clapped softly with the beat, others simply stared, unable to look away. They were witnessing something rare, something powerful. The transformation of a young woman from servant to star right before their eyes. They had come to the gala for luxury and entertainment. But what they found was a story they would carry home. A story they would tell again and again. The night of millionaires. Arrogance turned into a waitress's triumph. Victor tried harder, pushing into dramatic steps, twirling her with force, dipping her lower. But each move backfired. Elena's body responded like water, flowing, bending, never breaking. She rose from each dip with more elegance than before. She turned each spin into a perfect showcase of balance. The harder he tried to prove his dominance, the more foolish he began to look, and the more the crowd noticed it. The whispers grew bolder now. Some laughed quietly, not at Elena, but at him. Elena's eyes never wavered. She was locked into the music, her movements fierce, her steps cutting across the floor like fire. This was her dance of defiance, her answer to his mockery. She was showing him and everyone else that dignity could not be bought, that talent could not be mocked away, that respect had to be earned, and in every step she took, she was rewriting the story. She was no longer the waitress being laughed at. She was the woman who silenced the room with her skill. The orchestra played faster, the notes racing, the tension building toward a climax. Sweat formed on Victor's brow, his movements less precise, his breathing heavier. He was fighting to keep up, while Elena seemed effortless, her face calm, her body fluid, her every step perfectly in time. She was not tiring. She was only growing stronger, feeding on the energy of the music, the gasps of the crowd, the rhythm of her own heart. Victor was meant to lead, but everyone could see who truly owned the dance. A dramatic pause came in the music, a single sharp note. Elena used it perfectly, snapping her leg into a flawless pose, her body frozen in strength. The crowd erupted into applause, clapping, cheering, some even standing. Victor tried to smile as if it was for both of them. But he knew, and the crowd knew, it was for her. The waitress he had mocked was now the star of the gala, the woman whose dance burned brighter than all the jewels in the room. She moved again as the music surged, her body flowing into the final sequence, each step faster, sharper, until the dance reached its fiery peak. Victor tried to match her, but his timing faltered, his movements sloppy next to her precision. And when the music struck its final powerful note, Elena spun one last time, landing with perfect grace, her arms extended, her chest lifted, her face calm but fierce. The room thundered with applause. The silence that once mocked her now replaced with admiration that shook the walls. For a brief moment, Elena closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the fire in her chest. She had done it, not just completed the dance, but claimed her place, reclaimed her identity. She was no longer hiding her gift, no longer the invisible worker moving silently between tables. She was a dancer, a woman of strength, and she had proven it before everyone, including the man who thought he could shame her. Victor stood beside her, his smile tight, his pride cracked, his arrogance broken. The crowd was not looking at him anymore. Their cheers, their admiration, their whispers, all belonged to her. The power had shifted completely, and he was left in the shadow of the very woman he tried to humiliate. The dance of defiance was over, but its echo would last far beyond that night. Elena had spoken without words. She had answered cruelty with grace, arrogance with skill, mockery with fire, and in doing so she had turned the ballroom into her stage, leaving everyone breathless, leaving Victor humiliated, and leaving herself stronger than ever. The final note of the tango still echoed in the grand ballroom, the clapping of hands and the roar of cheers filling the air. Elena stood in her finishing pose, her chest lifted, her eyes calm, her body glowing with the fire of the dance. The room that had once laughed at her was now on its feet, applauding her with admiration. Some guests whistled, some shouted bravo, and for a moment it felt as if the chandeliers themselves shook with the force of the applause. She had won their respect. Without speaking a word, only with the language of her dance. Victor stood beside her, his hands still outstretched, his smile forced, sweat shining on his forehead. He had started this dance certain of victory, certain that the waitress would stumble and embarrass herself. But the opposite had happened. The joke was now on him. His arrogance had been ripped apart in front of the same people he wanted to impress. He could feel their eyes on him, not with admiration, but with judgment. Their whispers cut through him sharper than the music ever could. He tried to laugh, clapping his hands along with the crowd, pretending that it had all been a game, pretending that he had meant for her to shine. But his voice cracked when he laughed, his claps felt hollow, and he knew the truth. Everyone knew the truth. He had been defeated, not in wealth, not in power, but in grace, in dignity, in talent, something his money could never buy, something this waitress carried inside her like a crown he could never wear. Elena slowly lowered her arms, her breath steady. She bowed slightly, and the crowd cheered louder. People who had mocked her minutes ago now looked at her with awe. Her co-workers hidden in the corners grinned with pride, shocked by the secret she had revealed. The wealthy women in their jeweled gowns leaned closer to whisper her name. The men who had laughed earlier now nodded with respect. She had turned the tide of the entire room. She had taken the insult and transformed it into a triumph. Victor's friends, the ones who had cheered his challenge, sat stiffly now, their smiles gone, their faces pale. They looked at him with unease, embarrassed to be connected to his arrogance. One of them tried to clap weakly, but quickly stopped when he noticed others glaring. The power Victor once had in that room was slipping through his fingers, and all because of the very woman he thought was beneath him. Inside Victor's chest, anger burned, but it was tangled with humiliation. He could not admit defeat, not in front of this crowd, not in front of Elena. So he forced his grin wider, bowing dramatically to her as if it had all been his idea. But the crowd did not cheer for him. Their applause did not belong to him. Their eyes slid past him as though he were a shadow. All of it belonged to her, the waitress who had stood her ground, the dancer who had risen from nowhere and stolen the night. For Elena, this was not about revenge. She did not look at him with anger. She did not smirk at his embarrassment. Her face remained calm, her dignity intact. She had not danced to destroy him. She had danced to free herself, to remind herself of who she was. She stood there quietly, accepting the applause. But inside she felt her father's voice again, proud and steady, reminding her that she had never lost her gift, that no matter how far she had stepped away from the stage had always lived inside her. Victor felt the heat of the crowd's whispers. He could hear fragments. She's incredible, better than any professional, how foolish of him. The words stabbed at him like knives. He tried to meet their eyes, to regain their respect, but their admiration was gone. They looked at him differently now, as if the mask had slipped and they saw only a man desperate for attention. A man who mocked others to feel tall but was small when faced with true greatness. The orchestra members set their instruments down, watching Elena with admiration. Even they seemed to know the truth. They had played for countless dancers, countless events. But this night was different. This night belonged to her. The waitress who transformed the dance floor into her own kingdom. Victor glanced at them and saw it too. The way even the musicians smiled for her, not him, and it made his pride shrink further, his throat tight with shame. He wanted to say something, to regain control, to remind everyone of his wealth, his status, his power. But the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? His challenge had been answered, his bet had been shattered, his pride had been crushed, and the world had seen it happen. The more he tried to hide it, the clearer it became. He had been defeated not by another millionaire, not by a rival of his own circle, but by a woman he had laughed at, a woman who worked long hours carrying trays, a woman whose dignity outshone all his riches. Elena turned and walked off the dance floor slowly, her steps graceful, her head held high. The applause followed her. The admiration chased her. She had not just won the dance, she had won the night, and Victor was left standing there, smiling like a fool, his chest burning, his pride broken. The man who had wanted to mock her was now the one being silently mocked by every glance, every whisper, every clap that did not belong to him. And so the shocked millionaire remained rooted on the floor, surrounded by wealth but stripped of respect. The night that was meant to display his charm and power had instead revealed his weakness. He could not stop it. He could not rewrite it. He could only stand there, pretending to laugh, while the truth echoed louder than the music. He had been humbled, not by money, not by status, but by grace, by courage, by the hidden fire of a woman who chose to dance when he thought she would bow her head in shame. Their applause rolled like thunder through the grand ballroom. It seemed to go on, people clapping with real excitement, some even standing from their chairs. The sound echoed against the marble walls and crystal chandeliers, filling the space with energy. Elena stood tall, her breath steady, her eyes calm, and for the first time in years she felt seen, not as a waitress serving drinks, but as the woman she truly was, a dancer, a fighter, someone who carried strength and grace. Inside her, the crowd adored her now. They could not stop talking, their faces glowing with surprise and admiration. Victor stood a few steps away, his smile stiff, his pride cracked like glass. He tried to keep his composure, bowing dramatically as if he was still in control. But everyone could see the truth. No one was cheering for him. The eyes of the guests slid past him as though he were invisible. The spotlight had shifted completely, and he could do nothing to pull it back. he had become a shadow in his own game, a man who had turned a challenge into his own downfall. Whispers spread quickly, moving from one table to another. "She dances like a professional," one guest whispered. "How foolish of him to mock her." Another added. Even those who had laughed at Elena earlier now felt ashamed of themselves, realizing they had joined in his cruelty, realizing they had underestimated her. The ballroom, once filled with mocking laughter, was now filled with respect for the very woman they had dismissed. The tables had turned, and Victor was standing in the wrong place of the story. Some of the wealthy women leaned closer to get a better look at Elena, their jeweled necklaces sparkling under the light. They admired not just her skill but her dignity. She had not shouted, she had not begged, she had not cried. She had simply accepted the challenge and let her talent speak. That was something money could never buy. Some of the men nodded, impressed, muttering that she had more courage than anyone else in the room. Her co-workers in the far corners smiled wide, their hearts swelling with pride. They had worked beside her every night, never knowing she carried such a secret inside her. Victor's friends, the ones who had laughed the loudest when he made his cruel bet, now sat uncomfortably in their seats, their drinks untouched, their eyes avoiding his. They knew what everyone else knew. The mighty millionaire had been humiliated by the very person he thought beneath him. One of them tried to joke, to lighten the mood, but the words died in his throat when no one laughed, not even Victor. The atmosphere had shifted. It no longer favored the man with money, it favored the woman with heart. Elena walked off the dance floor slowly, her steps graceful, her chin lifted high. The crowd parted for her as if she were royalty. Some even reached out, touching her arm lightly, congratulating her, their voices warm, their smiles genuine. She thanked them politely, her face calm. But inside her chest her heart glowed like fire. She had done it. She had answered humiliation with dignity. She had proven to herself that she was still the dancer her father always believed in. She did not need Victor's approval. She did not need anyone's pity. She had her own strength, and tonight she had shown it. Victor, however, could not escape. He was trapped under the weight of his own arrogance. The whispers cut deeper with every passing second. He tried to laugh, to pretend he had meant for this to happen. But no one believed him. The more he tried to smile, the more pathetic he looked. People shook their heads quietly. Some even rolled their eyes. His charm was gone, his power cracked, and though he still had his millions, he no longer had the respect of the room. Respect was not something wealth could buy, and he had just lost it all to a woman who had walked into the gala wearing a waitress uniform. The irony was cruel. The challenge he had thrown at her to mock her had become the very rope he tied around his own pride. Elena had not just danced, she had turned the stage against him. The same people who once admired Victor's arrogance now admired her courage. He had tried to make her small, but she had grown taller than him, taller than his wealth, taller than his status. She had taken the power he thought he owned, and she had done it with grace. Without a single insult, without a single cruel word, she had let the dance speak, and the dance had spoken louder than anything. The orchestra members watched her with smiles, nodding as if they too had witnessed something rare. Even they were caught in her spell, and when she passed by them, they tapped their instruments lightly in respect. A small gesture but filled with meaning. Victor noticed it too, and it stung him more than any words, because even the musicians, people used to playing for the rich and powerful, had chosen her side. The power of the night no longer belonged to him. Elena finally reached the side of the ballroom where the other staff stood. Her co-workers welcomed her with wide smiles, some whispering, "We never knew, Elena." Others simply clapping softly. She gave them a small smile, humble and warm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But deep down they all knew everything had changed. She was no longer just one of them. She was something greater. She had carried their silence, their hidden pride, onto the stage and turned it into victory. Victor remained in the middle of the ballroom, pretending to fix his cufflinks, pretending to laugh with his friends. But his laughter was hollow, his face tight. He could not hide what everyone already saw. The mighty man had been humbled. The tables had turned completely, and the waitress he mocked had become the star, while he, the millionaire, had become the fool. That night, the story of the dance spread quickly. Guests whispered about it as they left, their voices filled with awe. "Did you see her? Unbelievable. Victor will never live this down," they said. The tale traveled beyond the ballroom walls, into the city, into conversations at cafes and offices. The story of how a millionaire mocked a waitress and was humbled by her brilliance. A story that would outlast the night. A story where the tables turned so perfectly that no one could forget it the night was ending. But the memory of what had happened on the ballroom floor was only beginning to spread. Guests were still buzzing with excitement, their voices filled with wonder as they gathered their coats and finished their drinks. They could not stop talking about Elena, the young waitress who had stunned them all. Her dance had lit up the room brighter than the chandeliers. Her courage had silenced their laughter, and her grace had turned humiliation into triumph. No one cared about the speeches, the wine, or the charity auctions anymore. All anyone could remember was the way she had danced. Elena stood quietly at the side of the room, her black uniform reminding her she was still part of the staff, yet the crowd no longer saw her that way. Wealthy women in gowns came to her, touching her hands and praising her. Men in tailored suits nodded respectfully, saying she was more talented than many professionals they had paid to watch. Even strangers who never noticed her before now looked at her with admiration. She thanked them politely, her voice soft, her eyes humble, but inside her chest her heart glowed. She felt free, she felt alive. She had shown them all who she truly was. Her co-workers gathered around her, smiling, whispering to each other, some still shaking their heads in disbelief. They had worked beside her for months, never suspecting that the quiet girl who carried trays could dance like fire. They hugged her, clapped her shoulders, told her she was incredible. Their pride in her felt genuine, and for Elena, that mattered most. She had not just stood up for herself, she had stood up for everyone who worked silently in the shadows, everyone who was overlooked and underestimated. Victor, on the other hand, sat stiffly at his table, his face pale, his drink untouched. His friends no longer laughing, no longer cheering. They whispered nervously, avoiding his eyes. The applause had not been his, the attention was gone, and he felt smaller than ever. He had wanted the crowd to laugh at Elena, but the crowd now laughed at him, not openly, not cruelly, but in whispers and glances that stung sharper than any insult. He could feel his pride slipping away, shattered on the same floor where he once thought he was untouchable. Everywhere he turned, he heard her name, not his. Every cheer, every compliment, every whisper belonged to her, and the words he had shouted so proudly, "I'll marry you if you can dance this tango," now felt like chains around his neck. People remembered them, repeated them, but not as a joke anymore. Those words now sounded foolish, desperate, and cruel, and though Elena had no interest in his promise, the room remembered, and it humiliated him even more. Elena did not gloat, she did not even look in his direction. She had no need to, she had already won. Her victory was not over him. It was over the silence she had carried for so long. She had proven to herself that her gift was still alive, that her father's words were still true. She had let her hidden fire burn again, and that was enough. She did not want his marriage, his money, or his approval. She only wanted the freedom of being herself, and tonight, she had claimed it. Some of the guests approached her with offers. One woman asked if she had ever considered performing again. Another man mentioned he could connect her with a dance company. Even the hotel manager, who had only seen her as an employee until now, spoke softly, suggesting he could arrange something for her. Opportunities she never expected were suddenly opening like doors, and Elena realized that this single dance had changed everything. Her life would no longer be confined to carrying trays in silence. She had a chance to return to the stage, a chance to step back into the world she thought she had lost forever. The story did not stay inside the ballroom, it spread like fire. Guests shared it at breakfast tables the next morning, at offices, at social clubs. Some exaggerated, some repeated it exactly. But the heart of the story remained. A millionaire had mocked a waitress, and the waitress had humbled him with her brilliance. It became a tale of dignity, a reminder that arrogance can be defeated by grace, that true talent does not need wealth to shine. It only needs courage. Elena had become a symbol. Though she never asked for it, her story inspired others, especially those who felt unseen. Victor could not escape it. Wherever he went, people whispered, some laughed, some reminded him of his bet. And though he tried to shrug it off, the truth followed him. He had been defeated in front of the nation's elite, and the memory of that night would haunt him for years. His wealth remained, but his pride was scarred, and every time he entered a ballroom again, someone would remember the night he mocked a waitress and lost. Elena, however, walked home that night with her uniform still on, but with her spirit lifted higher than ever. The cool night air felt refreshing on her skin. She looked up at the stars and thought of her father. She imagined his proud smile, his clapping hands, his voice saying, "You were born to dance, Elena, never forget that." She whispered softly to herself, "I didn't forget, Papa, I never forgot." And in that quiet moment, she knew she had taken the first step back toward her true path. The ballroom had closed, the music had ended, the crowd had gone. But the story was just beginning. Elena's life was about to change, opportunities were waiting, respect had been won, and her courage had turned a night of cruelty into a night of triumph. She had walked into the gala as a servant, but she left as a woman who had proven that no insult, no arrogance, no wealth could ever silence her gift, and though Victor's words would be remembered, it was not his voice that lived on, it was hers, the voice of her dance, echoing long after the last note of the tango faded.